67% of second marriages fail. 2 out of 3. That's not pessimism. That's data from the National Center for Health Statistics. And right now, millions of divorced men across America are looking at those numbers and making a decision that shocks everyone around them. They're walking away from the altar permanently, not from heartbreak, not from anger, from something far more powerful: experience. What they discovered after losing everything once will change how you think about commitment forever. These aren't bitter keyboard warriors. These aren't failures hiding from life. We're examining professionals in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Men who built six-figure careers. Fathers who raised families without missing a day. Individuals who generated substantial wealth through decades of discipline. They followed society's blueprint perfectly, checked every box, honored every expectation. Then separation hit, and they learned what it actually costs when a legal contract dissolves, not just financially, psychologically, emotionally, physiologically. After that experience, something shifted in their decision-making process. Research in behavioral economics calls this loss aversion. The psychological principle discovered by Daniel Kahneman shows that losses impact us roughly twice as powerfully as equivalent gains. When you've lost half of everything you spent 30 years building, your brain's risk assessment mechanism fundamentally recalibrates. You don't forget that lesson. You can't. It's neurologically embedded. So they examined the probability, calculated the exposure, assessed their remaining time for recovery. Their conclusion: absolutely not. Not refusing female companionship, not rejecting emotional connection, refusing the legal structure that allows someone else to claim half your assets because they weren't happy anymore. Let's address what most professionals won't discuss in workplace conversations. One divorced executive shared something that researchers have documented repeatedly. The financial devastation isn't theoretical. One separation cost him $300,000. Now he transfers $2,000 monthly in ongoing support payments. His response to the question of trying again: hell no, unless she matches my financial position. And even then, probably not. Another professional expressed it differently. I've reached an age where financial recovery isn't realistic. I cannot survive being emptied out again. There's nothing remaining to extract. These aren't hypothetical scenarios from legal textbooks. The American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers reports average separation costs of $15,000 in legal fees alone. That's average, including quick, uncontested cases. Contested separations, 6 figures. Some professionals report spending $200,000 or more just in attorney fees, just to divide what they already possessed, before the actual property division, before splitting retirement accounts built over 3 decades of consistent contributions, before monthly support payments that continue for years or decades. One professional described his monthly payment as a happiness mortgage. Every month, transferring money for the privilege of no longer being legally bound. He accepts this because remaining in a dead relationship was psychologically worse. What he refuses: signing up for a second happiness mortgage with identical terms. Here's where behavioral psychology becomes crucial. First, legal unions. Roughly 50% end in separation, according to the CDC. Essentially a coin flip. Second, attempts. 67% fail, 2 out of 3. Third, attempts. 73% dissolution rate, 3 out of 4. Consider that pattern through the lens of decision science. You'd logically expect people who've experienced separation to exercise greater caution the second time. More selective screening, enhanced awareness of warning indicators, more realistic expectations about what commitment requires. Perhaps they do demonstrate all that increased caution. The probability of failure still increases. Statistical analysis doesn't respond to good intentions. So here's the calculation. Men in their 50s and 60s are processing through their prefrontal cortex. I already surrendered half of everything I accumulated. Recovery required 10 to 15 years, assuming full recovery even occurred. Now I'm supposed to risk the remaining half on a wager with a 67% failure rate at my current age, with diminishing time for rebuilding if collapse occurs again. One professional captured the risk assessment perfectly. The legal contract represents financial destruction. I made that calculation error once. I'm certain I'm not repeating it. But here's what neuroscience reveals. If this was purely about money, men might still accept the gamble. Men accept financial risk constantly, launch businesses with uncertain outcomes, invest in volatile markets. The brain's reward centers light up for calculated risks when potential gains justify it. Financial risk isn't what prevents them. There's something deeper operating, something that affects the limbic system, the brain's emotional processing center. Money can regenerate. The Federal Reserve reports Americans rebuild savings after bankruptcy within 7 to 10 years on average. You can earn more, save more, invest more strategically. Money represents numbers. Numbers can increase again. Trust operates through different neural pathways. Once broken, the amygdala, your brain's threat detection system, permanently heightens its sensitivity. Listen to what these men report. Both my previous partners were unfaithful. I maintained fidelity for years. They didn't reciprocate. Now my threat detection operates constantly. More critically, I don't dismiss warning signals anymore. I used to rationalize concerning behaviors. Never again. This isn't bitterness. This is what psychologists call learned helplessness, transforming into learned vigilance. Martin Seligman's research shows that once you experience repeated betrayal from a trusted source, your brain creates permanent protective mechanisms. Another professional expressed it this way: my previous partner broke something fundamental inside me, not financially, emotionally. She damaged my capacity for vulnerability. I don't want to be emotionally exposed with someone who possesses the power to devastate my psychological core again. One response resonated with particular force. Soul excavated. That's what separation feels like, neurologically. Like someone took a tool and removed everything that made you whole. Your brain doesn't approach that experience twice. Research from the University of Nevada shows separation triggers the same brain regions as physical pain. The anterior cingulate cortex lights up identically, whether you're experiencing a broken bone or a broken relationship. The devastation isn't metaphorical. It's measurable, quantifiable, traumatic in the clinical sense. Another perspective. The devastation of enduring separation was sufficient, too traumatizing to repeat. I still experience nightmares about the courtroom dates. That's PTSD, post-traumatic stress from legal proceedings. I still feel physically ill driving past the attorney's office. Classical conditioning, Pavlovian response to location-based triggers. That's not an experience I'm volunteering for a second time. Examine these responses through the lens of attachment theory. When you've experienced genuine betrayal from someone, who activated your attachment system? Someone who triggered oxytocin release through intimate bonding. Someone you trusted completely. It restructures your attachment patterns permanently. Psychologist John Bowlby's research demonstrates this clearly. You discover that verbal promises don't activate the same neural commitment as you believed. Words are just auditory stimuli. Vows are social performances without biochemical enforcement. You discover that symbolic objects like rings don't prevent attachment disruption. They're just metal circles. They don't prevent anything neurologically. You discover that years of shared experience, accumulated memories, planned futures, all of it can dissolve because someone's dopamine response to the relationship decreased, or they encountered someone who triggered stronger neurochemical reactions, or their brain simply decided one morning this wasn't producing sufficient reward anymore. Once that lesson integrates into your cognitive schema, you can't unlearn it. It becomes part of your working model of relationships. Your brain's predictive processing system incorporates it permanently. 1. Professional referenced the classic conditional learning principle. Fool me once, shame on you. There is no fool me twice scenario. I won't permit that response pattern. Another shared something that reveals the actual fear mechanism. I don't want to experience separation again. That's the genuine fear response. Not being alone. I can manage solitude successfully. Experiencing separation again. Enduring that legal process again. Sitting in that courtroom again. That's what my amygdala cannot process a second time. Social psychology distinguishes clearly between solitude and loneliness. Robert Weiss's research shows they're completely separate psychological states. And there's an even more significant distinction between the loneliness of being single and the loneliness of being trapped inside a relationship with someone who no longer activates your attachment system. Someone who demonstrates emotional unavailability. Someone physically present, but psychologically absent. One professional captured the comparative weight perfectly through subjective units of distress. The loneliness inside a dysfunctional relationship registers at higher distress levels than the loneliness of being alone. I've measured both states directly. Being alone carries less psychological burden. So these men reached a determination through what behavioral economists call System 2 thinking, deliberate, analytical, calculated, chose the option with lower psychological cost. They chose to protect what remains of their emotional resources, their inner equilibrium, their mental bandwidth, their psychological well-being. Not because they're weak. Strength doesn't mean repeating behaviors with known negative outcomes. Not because they're psychologically damaged. They're demonstrating healthy boundary formation. Not because they fear commitment itself. They fear committing to a structure with proven probability of catastrophic failure. Because they've gained wisdom. Because they learned something most people never discover until accumulated losses make learning impossible. They learned that a legal certificate doesn't protect against betrayal, doesn't guarantee attachment security, doesn't ensure continued oxytocin bonding. It just makes betrayal more expensive when the attachment system inevitably breaks down. So if they're refusing to legally bind themselves again, what behavioral patterns are they demonstrating? Here's what the data revealed. Research expectations suggested finding bitter individuals, men demonstrating hostility toward women, anger at the legal system, generalized rage at existence. Expected finding lonely individuals, miserable in solitude, desperate for connection, experiencing regret constantly. The actual data showed something completely different. Listen to what these men reported in subjective well-being assessments. The ultimate state of psychological luxury is sitting on my comfortable couch, watching my selected entertainment, holding my preferred food. Nobody criticizing my choices. Nobody creating conflict about trivial matters. Nobody generating requests that interrupt my autonomy. Just tranquility. Just silence. Just me experiencing my own existence on my terms. Another shared this self-report. My home genuinely functions as a sanctuary now. For the first time in 20 years, I arrive home and feel my cortisol levels decrease. No more hypervigilance. No more monitoring someone else's emotional state. No more conflict about meaningless topics. Just quiet. Just calm. Just mine. Separated at 47. Predicted my existence was finished. Predicted permanent misery. But my current psychological state, remarkable. I'm experiencing life satisfaction in ways I never did while legally bound. These men aren't merely surviving single existence. They're thriving. 57 years old currently. Finally achieved psychological equilibrium with myself and my circumstances. I'll never legally bind myself again. Don't identify the advantage. What would I possibly gain? What I possess now already represents everything I require for life satisfaction. 71 years old, single since separation 15 years ago. Built a highly successful business during that time. Travel whenever I choose. Visit my grandchildren whenever I choose. The gift of autonomy, that's what I call it. Existence is remarkable now. Quadrupled my net worth since separation because I'm not allocating resources toward things that don't align with my values. Best relationship quality I've ever maintained with my children because my stress hormones remain stable. Best physical health of my existence because I actually have time for self-care behaviors. And this self-report from someone separated 3 times. 3 separate times. You'd predict I'd demonstrate the lowest subjective well-being scores possible. But you know what? Now I genuinely love my existence. I finally stopped repeating the identical behavioral pattern. Existence quality is excellent. Notice the pattern in these subjective well-being reports. These aren't men who settled for being alone because they couldn't attract partners. These aren't men who surrendered. These are men who discovered something unexpected on the other side of separation. Genuine autonomy, not theoretical freedom that sounds appealing abstractly. The kind where you wake each morning and the entire day belongs to your executive function. Where your decisions are yours, where your resources are yours, where your time is yours. Nobody will ever elevate their voice at me again. That's my rule currently. If anyone elevates their voice, I exit immediately. I possess that power now. I didn't possess it while legally bound. I possess it now. Tranquility is invaluable in the economic sense. You cannot assign a price to what I possess currently. No constant criticism, no constant demands that drain cognitive resources. Do what I want when I want. My time finally belongs to me after 60 years on this planet. Here's what might surprise you from a behavioral standpoint. Many of these men continue dating. They still maintain relationships. They still have women in their existence. They still experience companionship, physical intimacy, and emotional connection. They're just never signing the legal document again because they realized something important through experience-based learning. You can have connection without a legal contract. You can have love without legal exposure. You can have companionship without risking everything you've rebuilt. One professional expressed it simply: autonomy exceeds a symbolic metal band, and research data supports this conclusion. Studies from the Journal of Marriage and Family show men who legally bind themselves again don't report significantly higher subjective well-being scores than men who remain single after separation. In certain longitudinal studies, men who never bound themselves again actually report higher life satisfaction scores over time. Why? Because they possess something the remarried men surrendered: autonomy. Locus of control research shows this matters profoundly for psychological well-being. Autonomy over their financial resources. Autonomy over their time allocation. Autonomy over their living environment. Autonomy over their daily decision-making. Autonomy over their future planning. They're not waiting for someone else to determine whether they get to keep what they've built. They're not hoping probability works in their favor. They're not gambling on another person's choices. They already determined the outcome. They already secured it. It belongs to them. Let's establish the probability clearly one final time. First, legal unions. 40 to 50% end in separation, according to CDC data. Essentially a coin flip. Second, legal unions. 60 to 67% end in separation. 2 out of 3 fail. Third, legal unions. 72–73% end in separation. 3 out of 4 fail. The pattern is unmistakable through statistical analysis. Each subsequent attempt carries worse probability than the previous one. It's what behavioral economists call the gambler's fallacy in reverse. Instead of odds improving with each attempt, they deteriorate. Ask yourself with complete honesty, using your own risk assessment mechanism: what other gamble in your existence would you accept with those probability distributions? Would you invest your entire retirement fund in an investment vehicle with a 33% success rate? Would any certified financial planner on earth recommend that portfolio allocation? Would you wager your house, the asset you spent 30 years paying off, on a weighted coin flip with those odds? Would you risk homelessness at 65 for a 1 in 3 probability of happiness? That's what legal binding represents for men over 50 from a pure risk analysis perspective. A maximum stakes gamble with terrible odds where you're wagering everything you have remaining. And here's what makes the risk calculation worse for men in their 50s and 60s, specifically from an economic standpoint. When you're 35 and lose half your assets in separation, you possess time. You have 25 or 30 earning years ahead. You can rebuild. It inflicts psychological pain, but you can accomplish it. When you're 55 and lose half your assets, that might be permanent. That might be your retirement eliminated. Your security eliminated. The difference between retiring comfortably and working until death. The difference between leaving something for your children and leaving them nothing. The stakes are higher than ever before. The recovery time is shorter than ever before. The margin for error has completely vanished. One professional expressed it with precision. Separation isn't losing a partner. It's losing everything you constructed over decades. Everything. The house, the retirement account, the investments, the business you launched, the inheritance for your children. All of it eliminated, split in half to someone who's going to reside elsewhere. With someone else. He's absolutely correct from an economic analysis perspective. Because it's not just the money itself. It's the opportunity cost that money represents. The overtime hours you worked. The vacations you sacrificed. The promotions you competed for. The raises you negotiated. The careful saving and compound interest over decades. The discipline and deferred gratification, all of it divided by a family court judge who doesn't know your sacrifice, doesn't factor in your contributions, and is just following a standardized formula. So men are doing what any rational actor would do. When faced with a negative expected value bet they've already lost once, they're walking away from the table. Not because fear dominates their decision, not because bitterness clouds their judgment, not because they harbor negative feelings toward women as a category, because they're demonstrating intelligence, because they learned from empirical evidence, because they refuse to repeat the identical error twice. One person asked a question that summarizes the entire risk assessment. Why would I bind myself to someone when the entire legal system is structured asymmetrically against me? When the courts statistically favor her, when the laws statistically favor her, when I lose, even if I committed no violations, why would I sign up for that voluntarily? He's not demonstrating paranoia. He's demonstrating observation of empirical patterns. The family court system was designed when most women didn't participate in the workforce and genuinely needed financial protection after separation. That made sense in 1950 from a social policy perspective. That was fair in 1950. But we're not in 1950 anymore. Women now out-earn men in numerous demographics. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics data, women initiate 70% of separations, according to the American Sociological Association. 70%. Yet the financial structures still treat men as the default payer in most jurisdictions. Men observe this asymmetry. Men experience this firsthand through the legal process. Men discuss this with each other now in ways they never used to, through online communities and support networks. And they're making rational decisions based on the reality they observe and experience empirically, not the fantasy of happily ever after that media promotes, not the optimism bias of this time will be different, not the hope that she's not like my previous partner. The base rate reality of how it usually concludes statistically, the reality of see you in court. Let me be absolutely clear before we conclude. This information isn't dictating what you should do with your existence. If you want to legally bind yourself again, proceed. That's your autonomous choice, your existence, your risk to accept. But proceed with your eyes completely open to the probability distributions. Know the odds. 67% of second legal unions fail, according to research data. That's not pessimism. That's empirical documentation. Know the costs. Separation can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and years of your existence. That's not exaggeration. That's documented financial reality. Know what you're risking from an expected value calculation. Everything you've rebuilt, everything you've saved, everything you're planning to leave your children. Don't let social pressure push you into a decision that could destroy everything you've worked to rebuild. Don't let loneliness in a moment of weakness push you into a legal contract you might spend decades regretting. Don't let the optimism bias of this time will be different override the base rate mathematics that says it probably won't be. Hope is not a strategy from a decision science perspective, especially not at this life stage. And if you've already determined legal binding isn't for you, know this: you're not alone in that determination. Millions of men have reached the exact same conclusion through similar analysis. It's not a small group of internet complainers. Millions of men in the actual world living their existence successfully. They're not demonstrating bitterness. They're not broken. They're not damaged. They're not surrendering on connection and intimacy. They processed the mathematics. They experienced the psychological pain. They learned from the empirical evidence. And they chose tranquility over legal paperwork, autonomy over systematic risk, themselves over a structure that wasn't designed to protect them. As one professional expressed simply, "I'd rather be alone than surrender half of everything again." Another said, "Tranquility is invaluable. You cannot purchase what I possess now in terms of psychological well-being." And a 71-year-old professional who's been successfully single for 15 years expressed it this way: "The gift of autonomy. That's what this represents. A gift I didn't know I wanted until I possessed it." That's not someone who lost at existence. That's someone who won. He just defined winning differently than society prescribed. He wrote his own definition. He determined what life satisfaction means for him based on his own values. And maybe that's the genuine lesson here from a psychological perspective. You get to determine what your existence looks like. You get to determine what risks are worth accepting based on your own risk tolerance. You get to determine what tranquility means to you based on your own values, not your family's expectations, not your friends' opinions, not societal prescriptions, not the people who tell you to get back out there without understanding your risk assessment. Share your perspective in the comments below. Share your experience. Share your determination. Share what you've learned through your own empirical evidence. And if you know someone who needs to hear this perspective, a brother, a friend, someone experiencing separation right now, or considering legally binding themselves again, send this to them. They're not alone in their analysis. They're not irrational for considering this path. They're not broken for wanting to protect themselves. They're just processing the mathematics and probability distributions, same as millions of others who've done the exact same calculation.